If I'd known these tips when I started dehydrating, it would have made things so much easier. Hi folks, it's Darcy from the purposefulpantry.com. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about those beginner tips that I wish I'd known before I started dehydrating, and I want to share them with you because I know you might not have somebody that you can talk to about dehydrating because nobody else in your life dehydrates. So I want to start off this video by inviting you to my Facebook group called Dehydrating Tips and Tricks. I'll leave a link in the description box down below. If you're watching on your phone or your tablet, you may have to actually expand that to see it, but it's down below in the description box or in the comments. I'll put it in the first comment too. Our group talks about dehydrating 24 hours a day, all the time. So if you have questions, you can always come there to ask, or you can ask them in any video that I have. Ask me a question, I answer. So let's get started with the tips, and hopefully these tips will help you as you're beginning to dehydrate to make things easier for you so that you don't get so disappointed or confused or I don't know how this works. The first biggest tip that I have is that it's going to take as long as it takes. Now, when you read directions from a website, from my blog, from a book, they're going to give you a window of time that something may dry. Look at that as a guideline or as a window of opportunity that you should look at, but things are going to take longer to dry than most of those guidelines call for. Just know that if it's not dry within the 4 to 6 hours that it says that it's supposed to be dry, it's okay. Keep drying it until it's dry. The biggest culprit for that are things like fruits that take a really long time, and people don't really talk about how long it takes. I'm telling you, I do on my blog. I'll tell you, it takes a long time for some things. But when you're drying something like bananas or berries, banana is a berry, but anything like that, they take 2 or 3 days sometimes, depending on your home's humidity, the moisture level of the food that you're drying, how you prepared them, your machine's power, where you have your machine. Let's see, what else? There could be any number of things that affect how things dry. So always look at that guideline as being a window of opportunity, but it may take you longer. And don't get disappointed because it does. Remember, this is passive time, not active time. So it's not like canning where you have to kind of stay around your machine all the time, worrying about whether the pounds, the pressure is the right gauge. And I'm not knocking canners, please, that's not what I mean. But there is an active amount of time that you're involved with canning that with dehydrating, it's passive. So you get it all set up and then you walk away and you just let it dry. And if it's not quite dry, just let it dry some more. It's all right. And so the next tip I have that has to do with that drying is that don't assume that when you pull something right off of a shelf in your dehydrator and test it, that is the dry that it is. The thing is when things are warm, the sugars inside, the fibers inside are all kind of big and lazy and enjoying the warmth. And so you need to take you need to take some samples off your trays. Let them come to room temperature. It may take 5 minutes, it may take 10. Just let it come to room temperature, then you test. If you're looking for dry and leathery, you should be able to put your hand across the top of it and not feel stickiness, not feel moisture. If it's meant to be crisp, then you should be able to break it easily and there's no bending, but it breaks. The other thing to look for too is that for some things like vegetables and even with some fruits, you're looking for a plink and not a thud when you move it around. Like when you drop it on your tabletop, you're going to see this in a second. I'm going to show you. This is a thud. If you're looking for a plink, you're looking for a higher sound because that's when it's really dry. So make sure that you test when things are cool, not when they're still warm straight from the dehydrator. And so the next tip I have is conditioning. Conditioning is so important and it's not talked about often enough. Probably those of you who've been seeing me for a while have heard me talk about it a lot. I know those of you who are in my group or who read my blog know that I talk about conditioning all the time because it's one thing that happens that people will put their things on the shelf, come back to it in 2 weeks and see mold and think dehydrating stinks because if this was what happens, I just wasted all that time and money on this food. Conditioning is what you do after you get your stuff off the dehydrator. Now, if you're going to snack on it in just the next couple of days and that's all it's for, you don't need to condition. But if you're taking that food to put on your shelf for storage, you need to condition. So we're going to use these plums that I did a couple of weeks ago. A jar that I can put them in, and every day I can come and shake them. And I want to shake them and move them around because what we're looking for is we're trying to make sure that the moisture in all of the pieces is equal, so that no one piece is really wet when everything else is really dry, so that you don't have that patch. But that way you can tell if after you've shaken it and you hear plink, 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 and then a couple of days later you start hearing the thuds, that means there was enough moisture there that everything got it needs to be dried again. So you put it back in your dehydrator, dry it some more, condition it, store it, okay? But if you find mold, if you see a mold colony growing anywhere on the food in your jar, you must throw away everything in your jar. The thing is, when mold has formed enough to form a colony that you can see, there are a lot of tendrils of mold happening elsewhere in the food that you don't want to ingest and you don't want to allow to continue to grow. So unfortunately, that's the one thing of food waste that we have, is if you see mold, you need to throw it away. Post-editing Darcy coming in because I forgot a little piece. What you're also looking for when you're doing conditioning is that you're making sure there's no moisture on the jar itself, that you don't see moisture droplets on the fruit or the vegetables, that you're not seeing moisture, and that you don't have an issue where when you shake the jar, things stick to the glass or stick to each other, and shaking doesn't separate them. If they're still stuck to the glass, sticking to each other, there's too much moisture, you need to put them back in your dehydrator and dry again. And when you're all finished, once you've conditioned, you can just put them back into storage jars that are airtight, or any kind of container that's airtight to put away for storage. You've got about a year to 18 months on most things for the safe time, but you're likely to get another year or two, maybe 3 out of it. Equipment's not necessary. Now, what I mean by that is, of course, a dehydrator, a knife, and a cutting board, and an airtight container. That's all you need. Yes, you can do solar dehydrating, you can do air dehydrating, but for the most part, for most people, they're going to be using a dehydrator to dehydrate. So that's what we're talking about. You don't need a lot of other equipment. You don't need fancy storage gear. You don't need fancy cutting things. Yes, those things are helpful, but they're not necessary. So don't let what you see other people have affect your thinking that you have to have all this stuff to dehydrate. You need a good knife, you need a cutting board to protect your countertops, you need a dehydrator that would dehydrate well, and you need a storage container that is airtight. That is all you need. My next tip, though, has to do with the equipment. If you choose to use a mandolin to cut your food so that you can get really even slices for whatever you're doing, please, please, please wear some protection. Get a glove that's good, okay? No matter if you're using that guard or not, your hands are wet, they're still gonna slip. You're still talking about you've run past that blade, or you're inserting your blade, or you have a piece that won't fit on the guard. Half the time, what I'm trying to cut doesn't fit the guard at all. So if you're using a mandolin, use a good cutting knife. It's not Kevlar, but it's a chainmail. I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but it's kind of like a chainmail glove that will protect your hands from getting sliced on the tips of your fingers. I can't tell you how many times somebody has come into our group and shown us images of them going to the hospital to get stitches or have a tip reattached because they didn't use a glove on their mandolins, and those things are really sharp. Don't use the cloth glove that it's really cheap. Those are about $7 or $8, or may actually come with your mandolin. Eventually you're going to wear that cloth out because it's going to get, you're going to end up going right across the blade with it, and eventually it's going to start cutting through that fiber. The thing that happened to me is one time I did it and then went, why does my finger out? It's because it had finally cut the tip of that glove off, and if I had gone one more time, I probably would have cut myself. So these things run about $16. I think I'll leave a link down below, but please don't use a mandolin without one. Trust me. Another thing that I want to talk to you about that beginners often don't understand, or it confuses them once they've done something, is that you need to look at things as ingredients, and especially vegetables. Look at them as ingredients, not as a side dish on their own. So let's take case in point of broccoli. Now, some of you may find that dehydrated broccoli that's rehydrated is just fine, but for the most part, most people would think that it's not. So when you dehydrate broccoli, think about then using that as an ingredient that you're going to use inside of another dish down the road that you've already prepped, that you don't have to do much with. So you're going to use it to make broccoli soup. You're going to use it to throw into a casserole for some added nutrition. You're going to use it to make beef and broccoli stew. Can I say that again 5 times fast? Beef and broccoli stir fry. You can actually do it for that because it mixes in with the meat and the sauces. or you can put it in anything, in any kind of one pot dish that you have going on your stovetop. The same goes with a lot of dehydrated foods, especially vegetables. And with fruits, you need to look at the fact the fruits are a little different because you don't have the ability to add the additives to keep your fruit soft like a lot of dehydrated fruits have at the store. When you're looking at things like bananas, those bananas may have been freeze-dried, they were probably dried, or they might have actually been plantains and not actual regular bananas. So those things affect how things turn out at home versus what you can buy at the store. So don't be surprised that your fruits may taste different. They're going to be different, and that's okay. You're just going to have a different version of it. All right, the last tip that I have, it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to have quite a few mistakes as you start out. I still make mistakes after all this time, but I want to encourage you to delve into this and try it. Some mistakes are going to happen. It's just like when you start learning how to cook, if you learn how to paint, if you're learning carpentry, if you're learning how to sew or how to quilt. In the beginning, you're going to make mistakes because that's how we learn. Now, as far as the food waste portion, the only time you should really have to waste food if you're doing dehydrating is if you've allowed something to sit at room temperature that shouldn't sit at room temperature, like any protein. And those things are probably not something you should be dehydrating in the first place. And I'll leave a link down below and in the iCards of the Do Not Dehydrate list. But the other thing you have to worry about is if, like I said earlier with conditioning, if you've got mold, you have to throw it all away. Otherwise, if you dry something and you don't like how it turned out, make it into a powder, add that powder into another dish. You most likely won't even taste it. I'll leave a link down below and up above on how to use vegetable powders and how to use green powders and how to make those work for your family. Even if you didn't like the way something turned out, powder it, add it to something else, and it probably won't even affect the taste of anything, but you're still using that food anyway, and you're getting that added nutrition. So there's a ton more tips that I could give you, and I don't think you want to watch this video any longer. But if you have questions, leave them in the comments down below. And if you have a tip that I didn't cover that you think somebody should know, leave that comment down below to help teach everybody else. There are so many of us who've been dehydrating forever who have great ideas that you might want to learn. So make sure you read those comments. And again, if you want to join our group, the link is down below. It's a great place to come and ask any question and have lots of conversations about how to use dehydrated foods, what to dehydrate, how to dehydrate it. And I would love to have you join our group. So if this was helpful for you, please hit the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more preservation videos. We focus mostly on dehydrating, but we've got canning coming up this year. We've got lots of things that are happening. So I would love it if you would join our community. And until I see you again next time, happy dehydrating.